Welcome to PAILITICUS, the only podcast that discusses politics and public service from the Portuguese American perspective. Here we discuss everything from federal policy, local issues, and U.S.-Portugal relations with the goal of driving more discussion and awareness of the issues affecting our nation, our community, and what we as Portuguese Americans can do about it. And now, PAILITICUS.
Welcome, everyone, to another exciting episode of PAILITICUS. It's been a while since we have had the most awesome interviews, and we are looking forward to this episode as we bring on a state senator from the great state of Rhode Island. First of all, I'm Denise Borges, and I'm joined here by my co-host, the awesome PALCUS chairperson, Angela Costa Simões. Hi, Angela.
Hey, Denise. Good to be back.
Yeah.
Just a few episodes. So
that's right. It is good to have these live episodes as we feature Portuguese Americans who are in public office throughout the United States. We have, as I mentioned, the honor of having with us the state senator from the state of Rhode Island, who is Jessica de la Cruz, and Jessica is a Portuguese American. We'll talk a little bit about her role and her involvement in the political sphere. Welcome, Jessica. Thank you so much for joining us, Senator.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be on today.
And so tell us a little bit about your history, your Portuguese American aspect, and your involvement there in Rhode Island, please.
Yep. So my history is I'm a first generation American. So my dad is from the Azores, from Pico, and my mom is from Madeira, from Funchal. And they met here in the United States at East Providence High School. And I believe it was an ESL class that they met. And then the rest was history. And a few years later comes along myself and my brother. You know, I had a really great childhood surrounded by the Portuguese community, and I'm really blessed to say that, I was born in America, but my heritage, my Portuguese heritage is so rich, and I'm so proud of it. And, I was just thinking, I was just recently talking to someone about growing up and not even speaking English until I started school. And
wow.
I was so, there's a back and forth about, is that good for students? And I think it was so important for me because I can still speak the language. I can still speak to family in Portugal. And, obviously I'm fluent in English as well, but I think it was so important. And I'm so grateful to my parents that they kept that heritage and that Portuguese background so strong.
Indeed. And so you were born in the United States, but your parents made that wise choice of keeping Portuguese in the family, because as we who are involved in language teaching know, if it's your first language, you hardly ever lose it. So you were born and raised there in Rhode Island. You were involved in the Portuguese American community from birth. Basically, tell us a little bit how you got involved in public service. What drove you to this world that sometimes is not as glorious as people think it is of serving, but we believe here at PAILITICUS that it is a noble cause.
Yeah, so I may be a little different than other Portuguese American legislators, I'm not sure, but I was always civically engaged. I knew that it was very important to be involved. My parents were, eventually became U.S. citizens. They were very proud to be Americans. And so it was important to me to be involved and have my voice heard at the State House and having my voice heard, by speaking to legislators. I got involved because I applied for a license to carry in East Providence, and I was denied, and I had to take my case to the Rhode Island Supreme Court, but I won in the Supreme Court. But I still had issues, and the situation really rubbed me the wrong way, and I was not at all happy with the process. And I thought, this is a constitutional right. I've met all the requirements that Rhode Island has set forth. And so I was at a Second Amendment meeting with like-minded individuals, and Representative Sherry Roberts of the House, she said, Jessica, we need more conservative women in office, and I think you should run. And I said, oh no, I am not a politician. I don't, I'm happy to have my voice heard and go to the State House for rallies. But I thought of politics as, dirty business. And she said, no, but we need good people in office, and I think you should run. And she was really persistent and kept with me. And, one night I was really wrestling with the thought, I was talking to my husband, and he said, Jessica, if you do it, I will support you 100%. And with 3 kids, I'm going to tell you, I need that 100% support, and and I really thought to myself, I can do it. I can throw myself into this race. And what's stopping me? If I can be part of a solution and I'm not part of the solution, then really, it comes down to you're part of the problem. So I said, I'm going to run. I'm going to throw everything I've got at this. I'm going to give it my 100%. And sure enough, November
There
6th
you
came
are.
along and I won.
Yeah, tell us about your district a little bit. So, what is your Senate's district? First of all, enlighten us a little bit about the Rhode Island State Senate. So, you have 2 houses, correct, or is
Yes.
it just 2 houses?
We have
So, tell us a little
yes.
bit how many senators, and a little bit about your district as well, please.
Yeah, so there are 38 senators in Rhode Island. I represent District 23. I cover all of Burrillville, Gloucester, and part of North Smithfield. And it's a rural community.
Mm-hmm.
I would say that my values definitely line up with the district's values, being that I'm more conservative, I'm pro-Second Amendment, and I'm glad that the voters saw that and that they gave me the opportunity to serve them here at the State House and be their voice.
And so this was your first run for public office. You had not run before into a local level, like some people will step into a local level or a school board. You just jumped right up to the state senate.
I just decided I was going to run. I think ignorance is bliss. If I had run for town council or dog catcher or something like that, I may have been like, no, I'm right about this politics thing. But I would say there's so much power in encouragement, especially from an elected official, to say, you know what, I see something in you and I think that you could do it. And so frequently when I speak to people, I say, I was just a regular person, just going to the State House, having my voice heard, concerns, to my senators. And, I had no experience as a public official before, and you can do it too. And I'm hopefully more people will run this year in Rhode Island.
And so to Deja's point about you jumping right to the Senate, what have been some surprises, or, did you have any expectations about what it would be like? What have been some of the positive surprises? Any not so positive things that you have said, well, now that I'm here, I'm going to try and change these things?
Sure. I'll start with the good. When I look at national politics, I see a lot of contention, a lot of fighting between the 2 parties. And so, I assumed that was the same case here at the Rhode Island State House. I will say that I have found some really great people here at the State House who truly care about Rhode Island and want to see Rhode Island a better place for our children. And it doesn't matter what side of the aisle they're on. They're Democrats, they're Republicans, they're really good people. So I would say that I was very pleasantly surprised that it was not the same kind of atmosphere that I see happening in DC. Rhode Island, where it's a small knit community. I mean, I say community, but it's a state. It's like so many people, you're connected in so many ways. But I will say that we had a very contentious vote this year surrounding abortion. No matter where you stand on the issue, it just went down very poorly. There was just maneuvering that was it lacked transparency. Common Cause Rhode Island said it was unprecedented what we did here in Rhode Island, and not in a good way. So that experience definitely just disappointed me.
Mm-hmm.
Tell us a little bit also about your district as far as it relates to the Portuguese American community. So it's a more rural district, as you said, not, like the city of Providence, obviously.
Mm-hmm.
And so is there a particular influence of Portuguese Americans in your district?
I would say not very much. So from East Providence, which we call Little Portugal,
Right.
We have a high percentage of Portuguese Americans per capita. I think second to Massachusetts. Don't quote me on that. I'm not exactly sure, but it's a very high percentage. So, when I'd go to school and I'd have a popsicle with queijo e manteiga, all the other kids had that too. If I had grown up in North Smithfield or Burrillville, I don't think as many people would have that same kind of lunch and think it was normal. But there are Portuguese Americans here. Some of them very excited, that I ran, and they're happy to see me in office. I will say that the president of the town council in Burrillville is actually, he grew up in East Providence and he's Portuguese American as well. So there are just not as many as I would say East Providence.
Right. So there's kind of a close-knit community in East Providence and some other areas also of Rhode Island. But as do you find it that as such as yourself and others, as first, second, and even third generation Portuguese Americans become much more integrated in American mainstream, then they tend to kind of get out of the traditional Portuguese areas? That happened in California in the last 20 years. You think that's going to happen a little bit as well in the East Coast?
Definitely, I see that because, I just look at the class that I graduated with. People are living in Cumberland, they're living in Lincoln, they're moving all over the state. But what's great about Rhode Island is so small, and we can still, get to the feasts here, the Holy Ghost Trinity Brotherhood, wherever it is. We're maybe half hour away, so we can still be tight knit.
Right. Other than your passion for the Second Amendment, is there any other causes that have driven you now that you're in the state Senate that are important to you, and that you feel may be important also to the Portuguese American community in general?
Well, I would say socially, I'm a conservative person. I think that most Portuguese people are socially because of such a strong Catholic background and being so religious and adhering to scripture. So I would say I've got I would say I'm socially conservative, but some of the issues that I'm tackling this coming year specifically is something called the Energy Facility Siting Board. Now, it's not it's something that's going to capture everyone's attention, but it's really important to my district, especially Burrillville. They wanted to build a power plant there, and the town of Burrillville was vehemently against it. They said, we already have a power plant in our town. We don't want those emissions in the air. We want to preserve our green spaces. And so they were going to clear cut hundreds of acres of forest. And it was an uphill battle, and this company had never lost a battle. They had gone before the Energy Facility Siting Board in other communities, other states, and have been successful. So our little sleepy town of Burrillville, was David Goliath's story, and David won, and we're overjoyed. But so this year I'm working on legislation that makes the process fair for the community and for anybody else involved. So if a developer wants to come in, they have clear expectations of what needs to be presented to the community and to the state. And also giving the local municipality a voice in the process as well.
In Rhode Island, being a conservative in Rhode Island, is the Republicans, are they a minority or majority, or how does that play up right now in the state Senate and in the Assembly as well?
In the Assembly, so I would say that there are equal parts, by there's 5 Republicans in the Senate and there are 9 in the House out of 75. So I would say we're a super minority. And I think only Hawaii is probably more Democratic than Rhode Island.
Okay, and so how do you maneuver being in a minority party? How do you maneuver getting some of that legislation that's important to you, such as this one you just mentioned about the energy situation? How do you maneuver that to get your voice heard as a minority?
That's a great question. A question I got at the door, which was, you're not a Democrat, so how are you going to persuade them as a freshman to pass this legislation? Now, I'm not saying that this legislation is going to pass. I'm very hopeful. I decided that since I didn't have that political capital and I didn't have the relationship of, my predecessor was here for 20 years, that I wasn't going to be able to walk in and say, hey, this is my legislation. It's really great. You should trust me. So I decided that I was going to try to get everyone who had an interest in the legislation. So if it was, Department of Environmental Management, if it was the Department of Administration or the governor's office, National Grid, or whoever it was that wanted to talk and had any concerns, or they were, for the legislation, I wanted to hear their concerns so that when I went to leadership, I could say, listen, I've talked to everybody that has a vested interest in this legislation, and I think this is really great for Rhode Island. So we've got a great working group, and I'm very hopeful that this year, despite being my only second year in office, that we can pass meaningful legislation that will impact the entire state, but in a good way.
How and your term, Jessica? Your term is what, every 4 years, or how? And are there term limits in Rhode Island?
So they're every 2 years, even the Senate. So every other year, I'm running for re-election. So this year is actually my re-election year, and there are
So you're constantly campaigning almost, basically.
constantly. If people don't realize that, it's like you get 1 year of legislation and of working as a legislator, and the other year your re-election campaign. So, and
Yeah.
there are no term limits for senators
Okay.
and representatives.
Okay. So yeah, it's like in California, we have the same thing with the state assembly every 2 years, and it just seems like people are campaigning constantly. The state senators get a little bit of a break because they're every 4 years. They like that. Looking at some of the things that you're involved with, looking at your background in the Portuguese American community, I know that you participated as well in the FLAD legislative dialogues in Lisbon this last spring. And tell us a little bit about your experience. It was your first experience at the legislative dialogues, and FLAD is a strong supporter of PAILITICUS and PALCUS. And what do you feel was important? What was your takeaway from those 2.5 days there in Lisbon?
Yeah, I was so honored to be there because, I never thought that I'd get to meet the president of Portugal, and I did. And he was very pleasant, very knowledgeable, and obviously very well liked in Portugal. So it was an honor to meet him and the other legislators from around the country with Portuguese heritage. I would say I probably really enjoyed also the breakfast at Ambassador Glass's home with just about what was happening relation-wise between the United States and Portugal, how China is pairing up. No, I shouldn't say pairing up, but trying to cozy up with Portugal, and it was just really eye-opening to see what was happening in Portugal and the United States. So.
And
Mhm.
the networking with the other legislators, was that important for you as well, to kind of meet people from different parts? I mean, I knew you knew some of them from your neighboring state of
Yeah.
Massachusetts. It has a great big percentage of Portuguese Americans, but there were people from Pennsylvania and Connecticut, et cetera. So
Yes.
how important you think is that in connecting with other folks that may not share your political views, but they do share your ethnicity, and they share the passion for public service, obviously.
I think it was immensely helpful because there's actually one individual there from Virginia, and was able to connect with him, just find out what kind of legislation and what he was submitting in Virginia, and kind of just like bounce ideas off of each other. So I think, and even when I was there in Portugal, some of the Mass legislators from Massachusetts, was able to speak to them about what they were doing, and we didn't. I would probably say we didn't agree on most topics because, we're on opposite sides of the political spectrum. But we had great conversation, and at one point, one of them said, we're going to have this fair in Massachusetts. You should come. It would be great. We get the families together. And I was like, sure. So I think it's a great networking opportunity. And despite where you stand on your beliefs, it's, you still have so much in common.
As we come down to the end of our podcast, and I thank you again, and I know Angela thanks you as well for taking the time to spend with us and our listeners. One of the things that we always like to get is a little bit of your call to action to young Portuguese Americans. Most of our listeners are Portuguese American, and they are young. And we, independently, if one is a Republican, a Democrat, an independent, wherever you are on the political spectrum, the important thing is to have a voice. I have a friend of mine who says that if you don't have a seat at the table, you are the menu. So in order for us not to be the menu, we better have a seat at the table. So in your words, a little bit of a call to action, a little bit of a motivation to young people who are involved and who may just want to jump right into the state senate as you did, or run for some school board or town council, et cetera. So what would you say to young people that are kind of thinking about it but are not sure? What is important for one to get involved, for one to be heard independently of one's political leniencies?
Yeah, I would say get involved. Absolutely get involved. And it doesn't matter how you get involved, but just get involved. Because if you don't, really, the old saying goes, you don't have the right to complain. You should get involved by connecting with your legislators, letting them know where you stand on the issues, holding them accountable for their decisions. I would say, when you're looking at a candidate, maybe you don't want to run in for office right now, but maybe you can help a candidate run for office, and you can learn from them, and they can start to invest into you and pour into you, and as the next generation to come in and pass legislation. I would say it's your duty as an American to serve your country in any way you can, and if that means running for office, do that. If it's going into the military, do that. If it's whatever it is, whatever you feel that you are called to do, I would say don't hesitate on that. Maybe you're not going to jump in right into the state senate, but you can start somewhere.
Do you think that by some of the of all the divisiveness that is going on nationally and even at some state levels as well, in different states of the union, it kind of drives off young people from getting involved? They just don't want to hassle with it.
Yeah.
And I know that, of course, we need people from all age groups, and we're not just asking young people. We can be someone who is 60 years young and believes in getting involved. However, how much do you think that all of this divisiveness is actually having a positive or a negative influence in young people getting involved from your perspective as also a young Portuguese American?
Yeah, I would say as a young Portuguese American that was one of the reasons why I didn't want to get involved into politics, because when you look at it, it just seems so divisive, and I didn't want to put myself into an atmosphere in which there was so much tension and anger. But one of the things that I try to live by is that when I have a conversation with somebody, regardless of, as I go into a conversation, I might know, hey, you know what, maybe they're pro-choice and I'm pro-life. But when I go into a conversation, I want to go into a conversation with the intent to understand the other person, not with the intent to respond. And I think if we go into conversations with the intent to understand the other person on the other side of the table, we can have a better conversation. We can have an honest conversation and try to understand where people are coming from. If we're just attacking someone and we're not truly trying to understand where they're coming from, then that's part of the problem, I think.
Do you think that kind of, having your feet in the ground and basically just standing your own ground independently of hearing other people, which is not your case, and thank God for that, do you think that's been maybe a thing that is going away with an older politic, that younger folks such as yourself, independently of where you're at, are a little bit more open-minded to other things?
I can't say for sure what exactly is happening, or if that is exactly what is happening behind closed doors, because it also could be that sometimes, the media sensationalizes things, and behind closed doors, things could be very different. But again, it also could be that, there are politicians who don't like each other, and then they, feed
Sure.
off that sensationalism.
Sure.
I'm not sure. I can only speak to really what's happening here in the Rhode Island State House.
Right.
One of the things, kind of going off of Denisha's question about, what would you tell young people that wanted to get involved, but what's your I guess opinion or take on the impact that we can have as a national community, having more Portuguese Americans in office at all levels? Because, I don't know if people have any idea of really what our footprint is as far as the national having, people holding office that are of Portuguese descent, according to our records. And this is, very unofficial data just based on our research. There's less than 400 elected and appointed officials across the country that are Portuguese American. So it sounds pretty low.
Yeah.
And so what's the impact that we can have when we have more people representing our community? And of course, they're going to represent the interests of their entire constituency, right?
Mm-hmm.
But having people who are of Portuguese descent, more of us in office, what kind of impact does that have?
The impact is that they're able to reflect what the community wants. And when we don't have representation, say, we'll use these provinces as an example. If you don't have representation for what your beliefs are, what your core values are, then I feel you're underrepresented. And so I really hope, with this census coming up, I know there's Portuguese counts. I was talking to Maria Flaherty. Is that how you pronounce her last name?
Marie Fraley, yep.
Fraley, yeah. And I love what she's doing. We need to be able to know how many Portuguese Americans are here, but also encourage them to run for office because there are so many. And even if they're in those little pockets of, California, Massachusetts, and Rhode Island, as they start to this population starts to spread, I don't know how to motivate them, but I implore them, run for office because if you want to see a change, you're the person to be that change.
Right.
And that's a great way to end it.
That's a great point. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Senator Jessica Cruz, for this enlightening conversation. Thank you for your take on things. Thank you for your passion for public service, because that is so important, as Angela mentioned as well. Best of luck to you. Hopefully, this is only the first step. So next will be a run for the Congress, I'm sure.
Oh, jeez. I haven't even finished my first year, so.
Well, in politics, you have to think in long term, okay?
Politics is a very long. 2 years is a very long time, and a lot can happen. And it's funny. People already ask me that, but I tell you, I'm very content in District 23, representing the people, fighting for the people, having their voice heard at the State House. That is my passion, and I'm so happy to be here.
Well, we're happy that you're there, and we're happy that you're also not completely shutting off the idea of running for Congress.
No.
So hopefully that we will all be very content when you are the next congressperson from Portuguese American congressperson from Rhode Island. So anyway, best of luck to you. Thank you so much for spending some time with us and our listeners.
Thank you, Senator.
Thank you.
Thank you. And again, thanks to all of you for joining us. Angela, it was, again, another exciting podcast with the State Senator Jessica Cruz from the state of Rhode Island.
Yep. And so for everybody out there, if you haven't hit subscribe already, please subscribe to Politicus. Share this with your friends and family, and, get them to join as well. Please, if you can, leave us a review on iTunes. That will help more Portuguese Americans find us on iTunes. And with that, until next time, Denise.
That's right. Thank you so much. And we'll see you next time on another edition of Politicus.
Thank you for listening to Politicus, the official podcast of PALCUS, the Portuguese American Leadership Council of the United States. PALCUS is the premier national organization representing the interests of the Portuguese American community at large. To learn more about PALCUS and how to become a member or to make a donation, visit www.palcus.org. To submit feedback or suggestions about the podcast, email us at palcus@palcus.org. The views and opinions expressed by the hosts and guests of the show are not endorsed by PALCUS. Politicus is made possible through the support of the Luso-American Development Foundation.